Hi, my name is Joe Wilson. I want to thank my mentor, Professor Sleeper, and the Maricosta Honors Program. I'd also like to thank the Honors Transfer Council of California and UC Riverside for putting on this conference. I'm here to present my honors research project, The Only Good Pirate is a Dead Pirate, Freedom in the Golden Age of Piracy and the Empire Who Ended It. Sure that's working. The Atlantic world pirates of the early 18th century demonstrated in their behavior one of the most valued examples of European Enlightenment ideals, that all men be created equal. Against seemingly insurmountable odds, these men renounced their place in a society that had turned its back on them and sought to reclaim their freedom and agency. They were former privateers, naval mariners, and slaves escaped from plantations or ships where they were forcibly pressed into service, who instead chose freedom. These individuals came together under an agreement of equality, an agreement that offered each one of them a voice and an equal share of all profits. These acts of personal defiance would become a blueprint that would be used to wage and win political revolutions across the Atlantic world in the 18th and 19th centuries. An important distinction we must make is between pirates and privateers. A privateer was licensed by their government to attack foreign ships during wartime. For over 10 years, the War of Spanish Succession, known in America as Queen Anne's War, had been fought between England, France, and Spain, and vast resources were poured into their navies. To bolster its power at sea, England issued contracts to private captains called letters of marque. They permitted them to attack Spanish and French ships in the name of England. In exchange for their naval power, England allowed these privateers to keep the ships and cargo they seized, minus any taxes levied by the government. Between 1713 and 1714, a series of treaties were signed, known as the Peace of Utrecht. They ended Queen Anne's War and revoked all privateering contracts. While this may have served the British government, it was terrible for these privateers. They had lost their most valuable form of employment, leaving them with the much less desirable options of the Royal Navy or the Merchant Marines. This, however, would not stop them from continuing the lucrative practice they had learned in service to the Crown. And it would be the privateers of Queen Anne's War who would form the core group of pirates that sailed during what we now call the Golden Age of Piracy. Pirates did essentially the same work as privateers, except they had no allegiance to any king or government. They operated as what we might call free agents. But in the world of expanding empire and mercantile rule, these wild cards had become a liability that their former employers would soon decide to put an end to. During the late 17th and early 18th centuries, the war machines of the British Royal Navy and Merchant Marines were constantly in need of able-bodied men, and the practice of impressment, by which young men were abducted off the street and forced aboard naval vessels, was the main way of filling that need. Life aboard one of these ships was oppressive and dangerous, and if a sailor survived, there was no guarantee they'd be able to leave their ship once they returned home with their meager pay, if they were paid at all. Many sailors of the time were due several years of back pay. It was more likely that upon arrival to their home port, they'd be immediately taken by a press gang and forced back into service aboard another ship. Many of the riots that preceded the American Revolution were caused by angry towns resisting British impressment of their young men. In contrast with the Royal Navy, the Merchant Marines, or any other institution of the time, pirate companies functioned as democracies. Decades before the American and French revolutions, pirates were engaging in a true democracy based on the ideals of liberty and equality. At the start of a new voyage or the election of a new captain, a set of articles was drawn up, and all members of the crew were expected to sign. These have become known as the Articles of Agreement. They specified the voting process and how loot was to be divvied up, each man receiving an equal share of the prizes. They also stipulated compensation for injuries, some of them even providing a form of life insurance to be delivered to a specified person upon a sailor's death. They covered the various rules aboard the ship and what the consequences were for breaking them. This usage of signed agreements with specific rules and protections for the individual, along with the policy of universal suffrage, illustrates the proposition that pirate crews of this period functioned as democracies and is a clear example of the social contract and how these companies were ahead of their time. Most companies had articles of agreement, and though they may have differed slightly from ship to ship, their similarities reflect their practicality. Pirates happily accepted anyone who could sail and was willing to join their crew. And typically, the only people who were forced to join were skilled workers, such as navigators, carpenters, and surgeons. According to maritime historian Marcus Rediker, it's estimated that 98% of pirates at this time had served as privateers or formal Royal Navy mariners who had deserted. Many of them were white men from English-speaking nations. However, not all pirates were white, and it would have been commonplace for a considerable number of a pirate crew to be of African descent. This led to an even greater sense of alarm for the British government, since many pirates turned out to be former West Indian slaves who had escaped their plantations or joined the crew when their merchant ships were attacked. Towns like Port Royal, Tortuga, and Nassau, notorious pirate havens, had popped up across the Caribbean and became beacons for the runaway sailor and the escaped slave. As these growing bands of buccaneers attempted to form their own pirate republic, their ability to destabilize the Royal Navy, as well as the institution of slavery, posed an existential threat to the British Empire, and this put a target on their backs. Piracy was the only crime for which the punishment of death could be given with no trial and with no fear of reprisal for the one carrying out the punishment. By looking at the way the English government and elites viewed them, we may gain a better understanding of the reason the former privateers might have chosen to forsake their nation and become pirates. Pirates were defined by law as hostis humani generis, which means enemies of all humanity. They were viewed as the worst form of traitors, thought to have forsaken their own country, and therefore not deserving of the common humanity afforded to other criminals. They were compared to Satan, and thought to be in a constant state of hostility toward all humanity, and as a consequence toward God himself. It is important to consider the situation these men were put in by their government. Employed by the English government one day, and the next they were without their means of living. At the time, many of them were stranded in remote Caribbean ports that had been destroyed in the war. They were looked at as one of the lowest classes of their society simply for being mariners. And due to the massive expenditures during the war, the Royal Navy, their only other opportunity for employment, had been effectively demobilized. These men's homes had been destroyed, and they were cut off from the protection and employment of their government. Many of them simply had no other option than to keep doing what they were doing. This set of circumstances adds weight to the idea that the golden age of piracy occurred as a direct result of the policies and decisions of the British government. A modern comparison might be made to the Vietnam veterans who came home to a society that rejected them and a government that had forgotten them. These poor young sailors may have felt betrayed by their country, their purpose taken away from them, a sense of inner turmoil when faced with the decision to turn pirate, a hesitation in the knowledge they'd be abandoning the protection of their country, but a realization of the triviality with which they'd been treated by those in power. And out of this feeling of betrayal arose a hatred and a hostility, where old ideas of duty to the crown, country, and God were abandoned for a new paradigm, freedom. As Americans, a fair amount of cognitive dissonance is produced when the phrase, "all men are created equal," is followed by the knowledge that most early American citizens were not afforded the right to vote. This right was based on property ownership, and it's a right that many of us now take for granted, and which in the early days of our republic, few of us would have had. It's said that history is written by the victors, which may pose this question. If the American revolutionaries had not been victorious and England had written the history books, would modern minds view those revolutionaries with the same disdain as the failed pirates? And had the pirates succeeded in creating their republic, would their narrative be different? If we can look beneath the surface level retelling of our nation's history, we will see that while our founding fathers were indeed working from Enlightenment ideals, a proper education, and even good intent, the lowly pirates, with their universal suffrage, diversity, and equality, had a much purer form of democracy, and they came together to form a republic of their own. The ship became the state, and the crew its citizens, held fast by their common goal of freedom. Thomas Hobbes stated in his second treatise that without a common power to keep him in check, man was in a constant state of war, a war of all against all. He describes this as the state of nature. When a pirate abandoned his country for the war of all against all, he could most definitely be described as an enemy of all humanity. And this is how British elites viewed these pirates, as enemies in a desperate state of nature, at war with all. But within the pirate crew, There was a self-contained civil structure created by an agreement to form a company, and therefore the crew raised themselves out of this Hobbesian state of nature to form their own miniature state, as legitimate as any other state. The economic, political, and natural events of the early 18th century precipitated a perfect storm that made this golden age of piracy possible. Abandoned by their government, these people came together to form a state of their own, creating a social contract and exercising popular sovereignty to protect the individual and the crew. It's inspiring to see the human ability to rise above circumstance, especially in an era of such oppression and destitute suffering. It's easy to focus on the popular ideas of pirates as bloodthirsty monsters, but these ideas seem to be mere holdovers from the concept of hostis humani generis, a label created by elites, but who by their very nature fit that description much better than those they gave it to. These Golden Age pirates caused a great disruption to the workings of the most powerful country in the world, but beyond the material value of the wealth they were able to gain, they showed how a common purpose and willing minds can shake an empire. And they demonstrated the power of the human spirit by shrugging off the yoke of an oppressive society and seizing control of their own destiny. Thank you.
You brought a newfound interest in pirates for me.
I'm curious, what is some of the common misconceptions of pirates that you found while doing your research?
I've got a good one for you, like a good example of that. Does everybody know Blackbeard?
Yes.
Any idea on how many people you think he killed? A lot, right?
Yeah.
0. Until the day he died, there's no evidence that he killed anyone. In fact, there's evidence of captains that he was, of ships where he took their ship, where he was trying to get them to tell him where their stuff was, where their gold or where their goods were, and he would slap them with the side of his sword, because he didn't want to kill anybody. The idea that pirates were these murderers, and granted, it has to be judged on a case-by-case basis. There was a pirate named Ned Lowe, and I think he was probably a psychopath. He was very well known for just terrible, terrible things. But on the whole, from my research, the idea was we want to get in and get out as fast as we can. We want to find the goods, get them onto our ship, or take the ship. But there, a lot of the things, like a lot of the situations that I read about, the people, the captains, everyone would be given a choice to join the crew. Anyone who didn't want to join the crew, they would be given a way to get back to port. Whether it was the ship or the boat that the pirates had with them that they wanted to trade off for the new one, or whether they would just leave them with the ship and they would usually give them enough food to get back to a port. So it really wasn't about killing or violence, it was about making money and basically creating a space for themselves to be able to not be under the yoke of the British Empire. Wow. I think that was, for me, one of the biggest things was I thought pirates were just killers. And they could be as dangerous as any other sailor, I think. Thank you.